Jump off that exhausting hamster wheel and into balanced living with Dr. Marissa.
Promise you joy in the mystery.
Dr. Marissa, also known as the Asian Oprah. Her mission, to be a beneficial presence on the planet. Her purpose, to be your personal advocate to live, laugh, love, learn. Her life motto, don't die wondering. Take back your life with Dr. Marissa Pay.
And welcome. You are tuned into Take My Advice. I'm not using it. Get balanced with Dr. Marissa, the morning show. And this is a show about hope and happiness. So there's no gossip, no scandal, and nothing that you probably saw this morning when you were scrolling through your phone, because I want to balance out all the bad news that's going on with good news. What's right about people, what's right about the world, what's right about you, and what's right about me. So here I am on KCAA AM 1050, FM 102.3, FM 106.5, exclusive home to the Asian Oprah. And yes, that name was actually given to me. I was introduced to Oprah as the Asian Oprah by Michael Bernard Beckwith. And she looked at me, looked down, looked back at me and said, "Nice pants." And it took everything for me not to say, "You want them?" In fact, I had those pants on stage this last Sunday. For those of you who saw, it's streaming live on Agape Live or on my Facebook. It's where I get my peace of mind fertilized and my positive roots watered at Agape International Spiritual Center. So a shout out to my big brother, Michael Bernard Beckwith, who just celebrated a birthday too. So that's been a lot of fun. And I've been covering some very interesting news stories, and I wanted you to enjoy this clip because it's so important right now as we are readjusting to the inequity and the injustice and the hate crimes and all of those not great things about ourselves in our country. I wanted to highlight again this week people who are doing so much with their entire lives to help educate around prejudice and racism. And I was lucky to go cover an event that I wanted just to highlight what some really great groups in the community are doing to try to balance out the racism that is in our education system. And then I have the question of the day in our second segment about overwhelmment and how we can use some Happy 88 tools for that. And then the final segment today is the first half of my interview with Jane Elliot, who some of you may remember. She was on Jimmy Fallon last year, as well as the Red Table Talk with Jada Pinkett Smith. So you're going to want to listen to that really illuminating interview. I split it into two for today and tomorrow. And that's today's show. Enjoy the clip, and we'll be right back with more.
Children are not born hateful. They are taught it. Some at home, some in public, some online, but unfortunately, all in school. With the implementation of core classes like ethnic studies that teach prolonged use and the need for equality, the district not only educates its student body and staff, but also the community it resides in, opening minds and changing opinions. So, do you stand with us? Do you stand because if it's not good for everyone, then it's not good for all of us? Or do you stay seated because it's good for you? I hope with all my heart that you choose to stand, to join us in our fight. Join us in our need for equality. Because once one person stands the effects of that, once one person stands, the effects of that person standing ripple through the community, opening hearts and minds, outstretching hands that join together to rebuild, and sometimes build completely new structures or places or seats at tables for everyone in this big conversation for the betterment of not just ourselves or our community, but for our world.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the Truth in Education Coalition for organizing this press conference and allowing me to speak on one of the most beautiful courses that I've had the honor and privilege of teaching, and that, of course, being ethnic studies. Now, first and foremost, I'd like to state publicly that the so-called expert panel of people who will be speaking at the OC Board of Education hearing later today are not speaking from the experience of ethnic studies. They want to spread misinformation. They want to spread lies. Shame on them and shame on the organizers of this public hearing. I highly urge the public to seek the truth, empirical research from the actual researchers who study ethnic studies in schools, and of course, the educators who've actually taught these amazing classes. Some of the studies I recommend include the 2016 Stanford study on the academic benefits of ethnic studies, Dr. Sleeter's NEA literature review on the academic and social values of ethnic studies, Dr. Cabrera's multitude of quantitative research on ethnic studies, and the vast articles conducted by the real experts who study within the field. Some of the researchers found that ethnic studies increases graduation rates. It teaches our students to be critical thinkers, civic-minded, communicators, and positive members of society. Ethnic studies is so needed to reduce the stereotyping and implicit bias in our society today. And most importantly, ethnic studies saves lives. Now, many critics of ethnic studies will say it is divisive and teaches our students to hate, but that is far from the truth. Ethnic studies teaches our students to love themselves, their families, their communities, and their his and her stories. We need ethnic studies in all of our schools, not just in Orange County, but throughout the nation. We need to adopt the liberated ethnic studies model curriculum and not the watered down version as it exists today. Si se puede, ethnic studies now. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. This is Dr. Marissa reporting live here in Orange County at the Board of Education. They're having a little press conference. I have someone here as one of the speakers. So would you introduce yourself and tell me why you're here?
Hi, everybody. My name is Paulo Magcalas, and I'm here to advocate for one of the most empowering and powerful curriculums, ethnic studies. As a former educator of ethnic studies and now school board member and assistant professor, I highly encourage and support this curriculum. There's a lot of lies that are happening right now with regards to critical race theory and this course. Know that this course does not divide students. It does not divide society. It brings them together. It's not about hate. It's about love. I've actually taught ethnic studies, and the panel that's going to be speaking later this afternoon at the Orange County Board of Education are not experts in the field of ethnic studies.
Yeah.
Look, oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
You're on a roll. Let's do it.
Look to the research. There's only been positive outcomes of ethnic studies in schools throughout the nation. For example, the 2016 Stanford study, Dr. Christine Sleeter's 2010 NEA literature review on the academic and social benefits of ethnic studies, the quantitative studies by Dr. Nolan Cabrera. You cannot argue that this course is needed, especially in a society that is so divided today. So I am here in support 110% to bring ethnic studies not in just Orange County, but the nation as a whole. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak, and let's keep the good fight. Si se puede.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel like this negative reaction to not wanting ethnic studies to be a part of prejudice and racism and a continued, against black and brown people?
Oh yeah, definitely. In the end of the day, if you look at, for example, social studies curriculum, it's always been Eurocentric. Look to the literature. Especially Dr. Sleeter's 2010 literature review. Historically, a lot of our public school courses have been very Eurocentric, and it excludes the histories and herstories of people of color, the LGBTQ community. It looks at civil rights leaders and other peoples of color as just an extension. When it's just crazy. A lot of people are left out, and it's really time that we empower all of our students so that they could see themselves in the curriculum. curriculum, and learn to love history and learn to love themselves and their community. I mean, ethnic studies is so much more than, teaching what's left out in the curriculum, and that's why I highly support it.
Great. And so there's really nothing to be afraid of.
No, definitely not. If anything, it's going to bring our communities and our society and people together. I taught ethnic studies in the Anaheim Union High School District. In fact, I developed the very first course. And it's not to be like, oh, I developed the very first course, but I actually taught the class. And it is a beautiful class. It's very difficult to teach. The pedagogy in itself is very, where the teacher can learn with the students. And act with the students. Be co-constructors of knowledge. And honestly, it's been my life's work and probably one of the most beautiful things I've ever done. So that's another reason why I'm here, is because, ethnic studies is going to be statewide. And local municipalities are pushing back for the wrong reasons. So really, it's time. Ethnic studies now.
I think they're calling you to be on the speaker forum, but do this with me. Peace in.
All right.
Peace out.
Peace out.
World peace.
World peace.
Through inner peace.
Through inner peace. I love that.
Thank you so much.
I love that. Thank you.
Yes, I'm so grateful that there are groups out there that are saying and standing up and saying, we do not want to educate our children to even more racism, even more prejudice. So kudos. And we'll be right back with more question of the day. It's going to ask, what do I do when I feel overwhelmed? And we'll be right back with more of Take My Advice. I'm Not Using It. Get Balanced with Dr. Marissa on KCAA, the station that leaves no listener behind. And welcome back. You are tuned into Take My Advice. I'm Not Using It. Get Balanced with Dr. Marissa, the morning show here on KCAA, AM 1050, FM 102.3, FM 106.5, streaming everywhere, including Spotify, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and of course my free subscribe YouTube channel that houses all of my past 503 episodes. So we are now in the middle of our show, or the second segment, where I address the QOD, which is the question of the day. If you missed the one on procrastination, you can get that on the YouTube channel. And today, I thought I would answer a question that I've gotten from quite a few of my life balance coaching clients, which is, how do I deal with overwhelm? Now that we are coming out, peeking out from under the pall of the pandemic, we are maybe readjusting now to a little faster pace. There's a little more stuff that I need to do, including get to places where it was really a hashtag COVID silver lining that we may not have appreciated before. But I have to say, I did enjoy the 16.8 months of maybe not having an hour prep before getting on the road. Instead, being able to sleep a little longer, get my coffee, only do makeup on half my face, only put on the top half of my clothes. Definitely had some benefits there. But now that we are experiencing sort of back to the future, literally, there might be more stuff to do. There might be that feeling of overwhelm. So how do we deal with overwhelm? So this is from my Happy 88 toolkit out of my #1 best-selling book, 8 Ways to Happiness from Wherever You Are. If you haven't gotten that, today's Asian Oprah giveaway is a copy of the audiobook. So if you're listening to this and when you are, if you're driving, wait till you stop, go to drmarissa.life and put in the subject line Asian Oprah giveaway, and you'll get a free copy of my audiobook. But this tool that I'm going to give you is pretty easy. The first one, it's in succession. So as soon as you start feeling overwhelmed, so your head's going to blow up, you've got a headache, you're tired, you want to crawl back into bed, you want to just say, I can't take this anymore. So the first thing you do, and you know me, I do this all the time, I want you to take a deep breath in through the nose. And release. Soft shoulders, soft elbows, soft knees. Another deep breath in. And releasing all the stories and the drama. And one last deep breath in. Connecting with me through Chi eternal energy, the breath of life that connects us all. And in that 20-second, 18 to 20-second calm, it's like a reset. You're doing a soft reset on your system. You're deleting some of those old cookies that want you to freak out and start that revving the engine and going off in a direction that you may not want to go in when you're in that reactionary form. So overwhelm, unchecked, can lead you down the wrong road, right? It's ready, fire, and then aim when you're in overwhelm. So we want to keep that centeredness. So that breath is the first thing that you can get yourself in that middle, in that balanced place. Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing is use a list. Now, for perfectionists, to-do lists are not necessarily your friend, because once you write down all the things that you need to do, and if you're a perfectionist, you're probably also a recovering overachiever, and you're probably also a control freak, and you write a list of 100 things that you cannot possibly get done during the day, and that, again, may overwhelm you. So if lists are not your friend, don't do the list. For me, I use the list as a motivator because I love checking things off of my list. When I do that, it feels good. It's like putting a puzzle piece, a jigsaw puzzle piece in place. I go, oh, that feels so good. So if that is true for you, then use the list. But make sure that your list does not say things to do today. Because if it says it today, then you're automatically setting yourself up for failure because you're not possibly going to finish all the things on the list, and you'll use the list to beat yourself up at the end of the day because you're going to have to transfer half of the list to tomorrow. And then you start, on the wrong foot and feeling extremely unaccomplished. So don't do that. So I just say, I put to do, and then I split the to do into two parts. One is I do, and the other one is Friendly Universe does. So FUD. I believe in a friendly universe. That's the energy that creates worlds. That's what Einstein says. The most important question that you have to answer in life is the universe friendly or not? That's the energy. That's the perfect timing, the synchronous. That's the, what are the chances of that I meet someone who has an answer to the question that I haven't even asked? So all of that happens if we're tuned into it, right? And I put that on the right side. So the things that I absolutely need to do, and I got this exercise, by the way, from Abraham Hicks, credit where credit's due. Esther, those of you who are practitioners of the law of attraction, I am a student, and I find all the tools very, very useful to keep me in that balanced place that attracts more and more good. So I have that list, and I put what I do and what the Friendly Universe does. And so the things that, I'll put in a good show, and I'll put it on the Friendly Universe side because it is really up to my ability to get inspired on what to do on the show that's going to make it a good show. And People may not like the show, but that's none of my business, because my only job is to create what I think is the best show with the, when I receive the download of, you should do a show about racism today. So then when I pre-record and I prepare for it, all things fall into place with that. I just got called to do an on location about the education system that is slanted towards the right side. So of course, that's going to fit right into the show. So I put things like the show on the right side. You might put things like my kids' good education. You might put in my parents' health. You might put in things that you don't really have a lot of control over. You have a little bit of control over, but you put those big things on that side. The little things like, one, I have to pre-record. That is something I have to do for tomorrow's show. So I put 3 segments on my to-do list. I put on location coverage for news that I've accepted from my New York news agency. Those are things that I have to do. The Friendly Universe is not going to do that for me and go and take the shot. I have to take the shot. I get to do a 20-minute talk for Unity Hamilton. I have to pre-record that, but the content I'm going to leave to my Friendly Universe on what that, and I also send an email to make sure that whatever topic it is. So you're getting, I'm using myself as an example in this. I hope you're understanding this. So when you put a to-do list together, instead of overwhelming yourself with all of the things that you have to do, you put the umbrella things on that side. You do the best that you can do with the time that you have and the resources you have. And when you define that as what you need to do, you will not get overwhelmed, because you're just going to do the best that you can do. You can't do any better than that. And so if things don't turn out, you have a Friendly Universe that has a reason that they didn't turn out the way that you wanted them to, because there's something better in the pipeline. I also use this saying as a Happy 88 tool called, it's always this or better. It's always this or better. And when I say that and I believe it, then I don't get overwhelmed too when things don't go my way. So the other last tool is 15 minutes at a time. So if I have a giant project that is looking very overwhelmed, I say, I just have to do 15 minutes at a time, and I just sit down and do it. Because if we don't, we go back to that question of the day yesterday around procrastination. So we just want to take 15 minutes at a time to complete what we want. Hopefully those tools will help you for today's question of the day. We're going to come right back with a very important first half of an interview with Jane Elliot that will help us understand how we get to racism in the first place. So keep it tuned here to Take My Advice. I'm Not Using It. Get Balanced with Dr. Marissa, the morning show here on KCAA, the station that leaves no listener behind. Keep it tuned. We'll be right back. And we're back. You're tuned in to Take My Advice. I'm Not Using It. Get Balanced with Dr. Marissa, the morning show. And as I promised, I'm bringing you the very important interview during these very special times when we seem to be looking for a solution to ending racism. My interview with Jane Elliot in 2 parts today and tomorrow. Please enjoy.
I have Jane Elliot, internationally known teacher, lecturer, diversity trainer, and recipient of the National Mental Health Association Award for Excellence in Education. She exposes prejudice and bigotry for what it is, an irrational class system based on purely arbitrary factors. And if you think this does not apply to you, You're in for a rude awakening and a nice awakening today on the show. She's been on Oprah, Jimmy Fallon, a month ago, Jada Pinkett Smith's Red Table Talk, and I'm honored now to welcome her to the Asian Oprah stage. Jane Elliot, you are a hero to me. I met you probably 20 years ago with your Class Divided Frontline PBS show that was life-changing for me as a diversity consultant. I used the clip, the brown-eyed, blue-eyed, the collars, and it really is a landmark, life-changing experiment that you did to teach children about racism. So as painful as it might be to go back, if people who don't know your 86-year young history of talking about this amazing, important topic, just tell us why have you spent a lifetime trying to eradicate racism?
Well, I haven't spent a lifetime trying to do that. What I've spent a lifetime doing is trying to stay alive. Number two, you need to know that I didn't do an experiment with my children. People like to use the word experiment because it sort of puts a lie to everything I did. And when you do an experiment, you're trying to lose something from your subject. You learn something from your subject. I wasn't trying to learn something from those kids. I was trying to teach them something. What I did was what Adolf Hitler did. And if you listen very carefully, you'll realize that what I did in my classroom and what Adolf Hitler did from 1933 to 1945 is exactly what is happening in the United States of America right now. And you need to be aware of that, and most people aren't. They don't see it that way, that they don't remember the Hitler years the way I do. The day after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, and I don't like to talk about that because it makes me sick to my stomach, because I remember how it felt when I found out that he'd been shot. After I found out that he had been shot, we were learning the Indian unit at that time. And the next morning, we were supposed to learn the Sioux Indian prayer that says, "Oh, great spirit, keep me from ever judging a man until I've walked a mile in his moccasins." I decided, while I was watching the brilliant, the erudite, the sophisticated people, members of the press that night, members of the reporters, asking questions of members of the leaders of the Black community, things like, when our leader was killed, his widow held us together. Who's going to keep your people in line? I found that an absolutely insensitive and unacceptable question, because JFK wasn't the leader only of white folks. He was the leader of all of us. And yes, his young widow kept us in line, but that didn't mean it was because we were so civilized. It was because it was a horrible thing to kill a white man. And he also said to them, "What are your people going to do? What are your people going to do?" You see, I thought that Black people were my people. And it really made me angry that he would put that kind of thought in my head or the heads of anybody else listening to him. So I changed the channel. And there was another one of our famous commentators, and he said to three leaders of the Black community, "Don't you Negroes think you should feel sympathy for us white people because we can't feel the anger at this killing that you Negroes can?" And at that point, I rolled up the teepee that I was ironing in preparation for putting it up in my classroom the next day. I threw it into the closet. I shut the door on it. And I decided at that moment that not only was I going to teach my children the Sioux Indian prayer that says, "Oh, great spirit, keep me from ever judging a man until I've walked a mile in his moccasins," I was not only going to teach them that, I was going to arrange to have it answered for them. Because I decided at that moment that the next morning I would separate my students according to the color of the eyes, because that's one of the ways Hitler decided who went into the gas chamber. If you had a good German name, but you had brown eyes, they thought you might be a Jewish person who was trying to pass. And so they threw you into the gas chamber. I didn't invent this exercise. I learned it from watching what happened in Germany and all over Europe from the time I was born in 1933 until the end of the Second World War in 1945. I'm not talking out of my head here. I'm talking about what I remembered. I decided that the next morning, because I'm blue-eyed and most of the students are blue-eyed in that classroom, I would put blue-eyed people on the bottom because I didn't want the power structure to be with the out group. So I put with the in group. So I put the blue-eyed people on the bottom, the brown-eyed people on the top. I didn't know how this exercise would work. If I had known how it would work, I wouldn't have said the prayer that I said that night and every night. I said, "Oh Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Oh Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace." Oh my God. And the next morning, I found out that I had created something that was going to give me nothing but peace for a very long time. Because I went into my classroom the next day, and Stephen Armstrong, the first little third grade student, came in and said, "Hey, Elliott, they shot that king last night. Why'd they shoot that king?" I said, "We're going to talk about that, Stephen." So after we had done the things you have to do first thing in the morning, first we said the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag with the words "under God" in it, which do not belong there. We turned that Pledge of Allegiance into a prayer. We're supposed to have separation of church and state. We aren't supposed to pray in school, but we put those, Dwight Eisenhower, some congressmen were lobbied, and they lobbied Dwight Eisenhower to get those words added to the pledge. They don't belong there. And when Colin Kaepernick refused to stand for the pledge, he was reacting to that and to the last lines of the Star Spangled Banner, which says, "Oh, say does that Star Spangled Banner yet wave, or the land of the free and the home of the brave." And he knew who the free were, and he knew who the brave are in this country. After we said the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, then we sang "God Bless America." So we broke the laws twice, according to the Constitution. And then we started to talk about the killing of Martin Luther King Jr. And I asked those kids what they knew about black people, because none of these kids had ever been in the presence of a person of color. And those kids knew every negative stereotype I had ever heard about black people, and some that I never heard of. And I finally said, "Look, how do you kids know these things are true?" And almost in a chorus, they said, "Because my dad said so." Fathers, and if you're men who are going to be fathers someday, be careful of what you say around your children, because they'll come to school to a person like me, and they'll repeat those remarks, and I'll know something about you that you don't want me to know, which is that you're a blatant, ignorant racist. Nobody but a blatant, ignorant racist would say the kinds of things that those good white Christian people were saying to their children at home over the dinner table. And we have to put a stop to this. I was shocked at what I learned that day. Blue-eyed people were on the bottom. I told the blue-eyed people to put their chairs, there's desks in the back of the room. Brown-eyed people are going to be in the front of the room. And I said, here's the way it is. Blue-eyed people aren't as smart as brown-eyed people. They aren't as clean as brown-eyed people. They aren't as civilized as brown-eyed people. You give blue-eyed people something nice, and what do with it? I said, they tear it up. They don't know any better. They don't take good care of things. And at that point, little brown-eyed Debbie sitting in the front row in that classroom looked up at me and said, "How come you're the teacher here if you got them blue eyes?" And I thought, oh my God, there it is. There it is. This 9-year-old child now feels free and confident to challenge me, as even though I'm her teacher and 24 years older than she is. She has the power now to challenge me because she has the right color eyes and I don't.
Wow.
I thought, good Lord, where did she learn that? I know where she learned that. She learned that from the significant adults in her environment, and I'm one of them. She learned her racism from me. She learned how to be a racist from me. And then Alan Moss, blue-eyed Alan Moss, in the back row stuff and said, Debbie, you know she doesn't have, Debbie, if she didn't have those blue eyes, she'd be the principal or the superintendent. They're both brown-eyed. And I thought, there it is again.
Wow. That's...
He's defending me, not as his teacher, but as a member of his race. This is insane. What's going on here?
Right.
And
So
all of a sudden
quickly.
I realized what's going on here. What's going on here is racism that has been learned pre-birth, and we continue to teach it until after you're dead. I was absolutely amazed at what happened in my classroom that year. I had taken all the courses about what expectations. I know that if you expect more from a child, you'll get more from a child. I knew nothing. On that day, when those brown-eyed kids were on the top in that exercise, that I had 4 dyslexic boys, brown-eyed boys in my classroom that year. On the day they were on the top, those brown-eyed boys read words I knew they couldn't read, and they spelled words I knew they couldn't spell.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, Billy Thompson, brown-eyed Billy Thompson, came up to my desk and said, "Miss Elliott, where's my spelling paper?" I said, "What do you want it for, Billy?" He said, "I want to take it home and show it to my mother. She thinks I can't spell, and I can." And at that point, he was crying, and so was I, because he didn't know until April 5th of his 3rd grade year that he could spell.
Wow.
And I didn't know that he could either, because he had been living down to my expectations of him. And I based my expectations of him on the kinds of things that his previous teachers said about him and his older brother and his father in the teacher's lounge of the Riceville Elementary School. I was just shocked, amazed, and ashamed, absolutely ashamed.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I had in my classroom that year a little brown-eyed, blue-eyed Carol, the Lutheran minister's daughter, came into my classroom in February reading at the 6th grade level. For a 3rd grader, that's pretty high level. She was absolutely brilliant. She hadn't multiplied before. I taught her how to multiply the first 15 minutes of math class. She never made a mistake in multiplication again until the day she had the wrong color eyes. Wow. And on that day, that brilliant, tall, blonde, pale-faced, gorgeous little so-called perfect example of the American girl made mistakes in reading, made mistakes in spelling. She forgot how to multiply. She came in from recess crying, and I said, "What's going on here?" As she walked across the playground, 2 brown-eyed Debbies and a brown-eyed Cindy stepped up behind her. One of them reached up, struck her across the back with her forearm, and when Carol turned around, Debbie said to her, "Now you have to apologize to me for getting in my way, because I'm better than you are."
Wow.
And Carol apologized and came into the room crying. Make no mistake about this. That would not have happened if I had not introduced racism based on eye color into my classroom. And the kinds of confrontations that you see between so-called white people and people of other color groups in this country would never have happened if we, so-called white people who are really just lighter-skinned black people, faded blacks is what we are, if we had not invented racism, we would not have the problems we have in this country today. What you invent, what you create, you can destroy. We could destroy racism in 2 generations if we chose to, but we choose not to because it's a moneymaker. Now, I didn't really realize how ugly this was until I went down to the teacher's lounge at noon. I needed some support. I needed to tell the other 2 third-grade teachers what was happening so that they could give me some assurance that I wasn't completely crazy. Right. I walked into the teacher's lounge. There were a number of teachers in the lounge, including those 2 third-grade teachers, one of whom was about 52 at the time, and the other was over 60. I told them what was happening in my classroom the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. When I had finished talking, one of the younger of the 2 looked up at me and said, "I don't know how you have time for all that extra stuff. It's all I can do to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic." Well, she hadn't taught reading, writing, and arithmetic yet. She might as well have done the extra stuff. The other one said, and I'll never forget it as long as I live. She looked at the group, and then she looked at me and said, "I don't know why you're doing that. I thought it was about time somebody shot that son of a bitch." And she didn't say SOB. She said the whole thing. Nobody gasped. Nobody frowned. Nobody said, "Helen, God is love." These are all good Christian women. Wow. Nobody said, "Do unto others as you would have others do unto you." Nobody said to her, "In so much as ye have done it unto one of these, my brethren, so have ye done it unto me." Not one of those teachers expressed any dissatisfaction with what she was saying. Every one of them either laughed or smiled and nodded because she had expressed their feelings perfectly, and as the most senior member of the group, she had the most right to do so. I went back to my classroom determined that no student of any age, no person of any age will ever leave my presence with that kind of attitude intact. I will confront them immediately, and it will not be pretty, and it will not be pleasant, and I will not accuse them of unconscious bias, and I won't accuse them of microaggression. I will accuse them of being blatant, ignorant racists. Now, racists aren't stupid. You can't fix stupid. They're ignorant, and you fix that with education. And at that moment, I decided that I was going to educate these students so that they would never make a statement like that again, and never tolerate, never put up with having somebody talk like that around them. And that's what I did. I went to at the end of the day, I sent the kids home. They were glad to leave. They had never been glad to leave my room before. In fact, several times they would say, "Couldn't we stay overnight? We could stay here tonight. We could sleep on the floor. This would be great." No, I said, "No, we're going home." But that night, they were glad to go home and glad to get out of there. I went to my mother's hotel and told her what was happening in my classroom. She said, "Jane, you better be careful. You don't want to end up where Aunt Eunice did." I said, "Where'd Aunt Eunice end up?" She ended up in a mental institution because what I was describing sounded insane. Because what we do in this society on a daily basis about skin color is insane. It makes no sense. It is irrational. It is based on a lie. It is not based on a myth. It is based on a lie. Right. We had some unpleasant experiences that weekend, and then Monday, I dreaded going back to school because I had heard these little 3rd-grade boys say how they were going to get even those brown-eyed kids. When the blue-eyed kids got on time, we're getting even with those brownies. So I thought, oh, this is going to be ugly. So I walked into the classroom, reversed the exercise, put blue-eyed people on top, brown-eyed people on the bottom, and the strangest, most wonderful thing happened. My blue-eyed students were much less vicious to the brown-eyed students than the brown-eyed student had been to them.
Interesting.
I didn't know whether it was because they had learned something. I didn't know whether they were just their friends and they didn't want to do it. I don't know whether they had talked it over with their parents during the evening and decided it wasn't a good idea. I don't know, but they were much less vicious than the brown-eyed students had been to them. So on Tuesday, before we discussed the exercise at all, every child had to write a 4-paragraph composition telling who Martin Luther King Jr. is, how the child felt on Friday, how the child felt on Monday, and what discrimination is. When they had finished reading, we got in the magic circle, and what you say in the magic circle is acceptable, and we'll deal with it. So I said to that group, you blue-eyed kids said you were going to get even with the brownies when you got on top. Why didn't you get even with them? And those kids almost once again in a chorus said, because I found out how it feels to be treated that way, and I didn't want to make anybody feel the way I felt the day I was on the bottom. Now, people who are pale faces, what we call white, and we aren't, because there's no such thing. Faded black folks, which is what you might refer to pale faces, because we all came from the same ancestors back there 300,000 to 500,000 years ago, and they were black. The only reason some of us have light skin is because those black people moved farther and farther from the equator so that they were exposed to less and less sunlight, so their bodies produced less and less melanin, so their skin, their hair, and their eyes got lighter. But their brains didn't get lighter and their brains didn't get smaller. So get over it. And I have here a mask, which I should be wearing and which I sometimes do when I go to town. See what it says?
Get over it.
Get over it. Get over it. Get over this ignorance. It's time to get over it. I was absolutely astounded at what those kids said during that little moment.
Yeah.
I learned more that day and the 2 days of that exercise than I ever learned before, and stuff that I will never forget as long as I live.
Absolutely. And if you've just tuned in and you're wondering who this very indirect person is, sarcasm is another service.
That's it.
This is the wonderful Jane Elliot, a teacher extraordinaire who has spent much of her life battling and trying to re-educate people when it comes to racism. You're tuned in to Take My Advice. I'm not using it. Get happy with Dr. Marissa. Every Tuesday at naturally high noon, a show about hope and happiness. And today it is my birthday show, and Jane Elliot is here, zooming in from Iowa to talk about how now let's just go to the get over it, because sometimes people say get over it to black people who say, well, we were slaves and we came to this country against our will, and so it's not fair. And I've heard white people say, get over it. Like that was then, I don't own slaves, so we're moving on. This is the 21st century, get over it. So speak to that. The whole, Black Lives Matter.
That's what I want. That's what I want to do, is I want white people to get over it. The first time I did this exercise, I did it with third graders. They called me and asked me to do the Johnny Carson show because there was an article in the paper about it. I went in and did the Johnny Carson show. Then, because of that, the local Rotarians asked me to come and speak to the Rotary. And then I did the exercise with adults. Adults, get over it. Some of the people who went through that exercise for an hour and a half, and they were only in the exercise for half an hour, at a Rotary Club meeting. These were all the wheels in town. These are the important white males. Nothing but white males in that community. I put them through the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. Some of them never got over it. Some of them, there was one older man who would see me on the street later, and if he was walking toward me and saw me, he'd turn around and cross the street just as fast as he could. Later, he was in a motorized wheelchair. He would turn his wheelchair around as fast as he could and almost get away from me as fast as he possibly could. My husband was invited. He became a member of an organization in that community, and we were invited to a card party so that all the members could meet us. And if they were introducing the men as they came in to me, and when this older man came toward the table, I said, I know you. He said, I know you too. I've never forgotten you, and I've never forgiven you, and I never will either. I said, what did I do? What's going on here? He said, I'm blue-eyed. I said, and you're a Rotarian. He said, yes, I am. I've never forgotten that. I'll never forget it. And I'll never be in the same room with you. And he charged away. And all those members were going, whoa, what's going on here? You see, 20 years before that, I put him through the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. He never got over it.
And isn't it
White
interesting?
Folks, get over it.
But isn't it interesting that blacks who have gone through a lifetime of this kind of discrimination are told to get over it, and white people who have gone through a half an hour of an exercise can't get over it?
So the discrepancy.
But what's even more disgusting is every time I do this, the second time I did it with a group of adults, it was with the members of people in Canada, in Toronto, Canada. The Canadians, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, sent a film crew down to film my second group of third graders going through the exercise. They took that film to Canada. They edited it down to half an hour, threw it into a program about Eskimos. And at that time, they were calling Eskimos the N-word in parkas. And they threw that 30 minutes. Yeah. I heard a lot and I've seen a lot, and I'm angry at a lot.
Wow.
Anyway, they put that half hour of my third graders, my little white third graders, going through that exercise, and called me the next morning and said, "You've got to get up here." I said, "Why?" They said, "Because we've got an angry populace. They want to know what," and these are the words they used, "what in hell you were doing with those poor little white kids in Riceville, Iowa. You have to come up here." So I went to Toronto. My luggage went to New York. I had to buy a dress to wear. I chose badly. I went into the studio, and there, through the observation glass, I looked out and I could see a kidney bean-shaped dais on the floor with 3 chairs on it, and a semicircle, risers with probably 240 people on them. And I pointed at the dais and I said, "What's that?" And they said, "That's where you're going to sit." I said, "Who are they?" And he said, "Those are the people who have come here to question you." I said, "This looks like a setup." He said, "It is. Let's go." And he took me by the arm and took me out and set me down on that one of those chairs. And he said, "Now, this is Jane Elliot. Does anybody have any questions about what she did with her third graders in all white, all Christian Riceville, Iowa?" Immediately, over 200 angry Canadians raised their hand and commenced to question me as to what I was doing with those poor little children. The first question, and I get this every time I do the exercise with a group of adults. The first question was a woman. I suppose she was a white woman. I suppose she was 38, 40 years old. And she said, "How could you do that to those poor little children? Don't you realize that you could have traumatized them? You could have ruined them for life." I said, "It's interesting that you ask that question. And if you're that worried about what happened to those little third graders in a classroom with one teacher when they knew it was going to be over at the end of the day, you think that could traumatize them, what do you suppose? I'm sure you must be very worried about what happens to children of color in your country and mine on a daily basis from birth to death." And she said, and these are her exact words, "That's different. They're used to it. They can get over it."
Oh.
Now think about that. They're used to it. They can get over it. I have had that said to Black women who, at a major corporation in the United States of America, have gone through the exercise with blue-eyed people. And at the end of it, when we're doing the debriefing, a blue-eyed woman turns to the Black person and says, "This was too harsh. We shouldn't have gone through this." And the Black woman says, "What about us? We go through that every day." "That's different. You're used to it. You can cope with it." No. If you think that little white children can't get over for it one day, you must think that Black children and brown children and those children of other color groups are absolute.
We'll just go to break to thank the sponsor that made this show possible. And we will be back in 2 and 2. And remember, it's all about balance, peace in, peace out, world peace through inner peace.
Our world as we know it has changed.
Hate crimes against Asian Americans related to COVID-19 have increased significantly.
These crimes have grown out of unfounded fear, blame, and even ignorance.
We must face this challenge together and not let fear and hate divide us.
Our country was built on the foundations of tolerance and compassion for others.
These crimes go against the very principles we stand for and will not be tolerated.
Those responsible for committing these crimes will be held accountable for their actions.
We must stay strong during these challenging times and not let ignorance and fear tear us apart.
Together we will not only stop this disease, but also stop the disease of racism.
Stand against hate.
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 I learn something every single time I listen to her words, how it got out of hand with our education system. I thought it was an important interview to have rebroadcast. Tomorrow will be part 2 of that interview. So stay tuned to Take My Advice. I'm Not Using It. Get Balance with Dr. Marissa, the morning show. And in the meantime, Remember, it's all about balance. Peace in, peace out, world peace through inner peace.